You have tried the techniques. You have persisted in the assumption. Now, let Abdullah show you why nothing changed and what alone actually works. You visualize perfectly. You feel the wish fulfilled. You persist in your assumption day after day, and yet nothing changes. The money doesn't come, the relationship stays distant, the opportunity vanishes, and you wonder, what am I doing wrong? Let me tell you something that will disturb you. You're not doing anything wrong. The problem is far more subtle than that. You see, most people believe feeling it real means generating emotion. They think if they can just feel excited enough, grateful enough, joyful enough about their desire, it must manifest. But this is not what I taught Neville. What I taught him, what transformed him from a broke dancer in the Great Depression into a master teacher, was something far more radical. I taught him complete identity death, not adding wealth to his poor self, not improving his circumstances while remaining the same person, not feeling wealthy while secretly knowing he was poor. I taught him to become someone else entirely. Your poor self and your wealthy self cannot occupy the same consciousness. One must die for the other to live. And most people, even those who study Neville's work religiously, refuse this death. They want the manifestation without the transformation. They want the fruit without killing the root. I am Abdullah, and tonight I'm going to reveal the 7 identity shifts I taught Neville privately. The shifts that most will never accept because they require you to cease being who you are. Let me tell you how we met. It was 1931, New York City. The Great Depression had turned the streets into rivers of desperation. 17 million unemployed men sleeping 7 deep in the hallways from Gimbels to Penn Station. No welfare, no safety net, just hunger and fear. Neville was a dancer, but who paid to see dancing when they couldn't afford to eat? He had nothing, not one nickel to his name. A friend whose judgment Neville did not trust insisted he attend one of my lectures. Neville delayed for months, but finally he came. At the end of that meeting, I approached him. "Neville," I said, "you are 6 months late." He was startled. "How do you know my name?" he asked. "The brothers told me you would be here 6 months ago," I replied. He was confused. We had never met, but I knew him. The brothers, the mystical brotherhood I belonged to, had told me he was coming. I lived on West 72nd Street in Manhattan, a modest room where I taught the Kabbalah, Hebrew mysticism, and the secret that most men die without discovering. Consciousness is the only reality. When Neville came to me, he wanted what everyone wants: money, success, freedom from his circumstances. But I told him something he didn't want to hear. I said, start with self, find self, change that self. You see, Neville thought his problem was poverty. He thought if he could just manifest some money, his life would improve. But poverty was not his problem. His identity was his problem. He was being a poor man trying to get wealth. And this is impossible. You cannot add wealth to a poor identity any more than you can pour pure water into mud and expect it to remain pure. The mud will contaminate the water every time. Your identity, who you are in consciousness, creates your world. Not your visualizations, not your affirmations, not your techniques. Your identity. So over the next 5 years, I taught Neville 7 identity shifts, 7 complete transformations of self. These are not techniques you do. These are deaths you must die. And I warn you now, most who hear these shifts will reject them because they are terrifying. They require you to let go of the security of your known self, even if that self is miserable, and become someone you have never been. But for those few who accept this death, the entire world must reorganize itself around your new identity. This is law. Not because I say so, but because consciousness is the only reality and everything you see is consciousness pushed out. So let me reveal these 7 shifts to you now. And as I do, ask yourself, am I willing to die? Because without death, there is no resurrection. Without the old self dying, the new self cannot be born. Shift number 1, you are not poor. You are consciousness identifying with poverty. The first shift Neville had to make, and the one most refuse, is this. You are not a poor person trying to become wealthy. You are consciousness currently identifying with the state of poverty. Do you see the difference? When you believe you are poor, you are trapped. poor is what you are. Wealth is something foreign, something you must struggle to obtain. But when you understand you are consciousness identifying with poverty, everything changes because consciousness can shift its identification. Let me tell you about a woman I never met, but whose story proves this law. She lived in New York when Neville taught there. She had not one penny to her name when she first heard Neville speak. Not one penny. She was nobody, no connections, no education in business, nothing. But she heard Neville explain what I had taught him. Imagining creates reality, and something in her consciousness shifted. She didn't try to get wealth while remaining poor. She didn't visualize money while identifying as someone who lacked it. She changed her fundamental identity. She became wealthy in consciousness first. And then, over the years that followed, she manifested that wealth into physical reality. How much wealth? She owns buildings on 57th Street in New York City between 5th and 6th Avenue, some of the most expensive real estate in the world. She has businesses operating in countries around the globe. She has made millions upon millions, all from nothing, all because she understood she was not a poor person becoming wealthy. She was consciousness. And consciousness can identify with any state it chooses. Poverty was a state she had been occupying. Wealth was a state she could enter. So she entered it, and the entire world reorganized itself around her new identity. This is the first shift. Do you see it? You are not your circumstances. You are the consciousness experiencing those circumstances. And consciousness can change what it identifies with. But this requires something most will not do. Shift number two: two identities cannot coexist. One must die. Here's what Neville learned that transformed everything. Your poor self and your wealthy self cannot both exist in the same consciousness. One must die completely. Most people try to add wealth to their poor identity. They visualize having money, they affirm abundance, they feel it real, but underneath, they remain the same person. They are still the person who checks their bank account with anxiety, still the person who feels unworthy of wealth, still the person who believes people like me don't have money. You cannot build a palace on quicksand, and you cannot build wealth on a poverty identity. The poverty identity must die first. When I sent Neville to Barbados in 1933, I told him, when you return, you will have died. Not physically, but the old Neville, the broke dancer, the desperate man trying to get success. That Neville had to die. He went to Barbados as a strict vegetarian, 7 years without meat, fish, alcohol, or physical intimacy. A disciplined man, a controlled man. And he returned having broken every one of those disciplines. Not because discipline is wrong, but because the old identity that required that discipline had died. A new identity had been born. The trip itself didn't create the death. The identity shift created the death. The trip was merely the evidence. This is what most miss. They want the trip to Barbados before the death. They want the manifestation before the transformation, but it doesn't work that way. The death comes first, and it is absolute. Your poor self must cease to exist in your consciousness. Not improved, not healed, not supplemented with wealth. Ended. Dissolved. Dead. Only then can the wealthy self emerge. Only then can you be the person who has what you desire, because you cannot pretend to be two people. Consciousness can only identify with one state at a time. So which will you choose? The familiar poverty that feels safe because it is known, or the terrifying freedom of a wealth you have never experienced? Shift number three. Identity transformation requires practice, not perfection. Now here's where people become confused. They hear complete death of the old self and think, but I still feel poor. I still have fear. I still doubt, so I must be failing. No, identity transformation is not about perfection. It is about practice. Let me tell you a story that proves this. A woman's brother was facing his fourth major operation. The doctors gave little hope of recovery. She was terrified, desperate, but she had learned this law. So she asked herself, what does my brother truly desire? And the answer came. He wants to continue remodeling his kitchen. He had been planning this renovation before entering the hospital. So she began to practice the identity of a woman whose brother was well and working on his kitchen. She didn't try to feel perfectly confident. She practiced. And here is what happened. One night, in her imagination, she was gripping the back of a kitchen chair. Suddenly, she found herself standing beside her brother's hospital bed. His hand reached up and clasped hers, strong and sure. She heard him say, "I knew you would come, Joe." And she replied, "It's all better now. You know it." A voice said to her, "Remember this moment." The next day, his wife called. The doctor couldn't account for it. No operation was necessary. He was so improved they were releasing him. The following Monday, her brother returned to work perfectly well and has been since that day. Did she practice perfectly? No. Did she maintain the feeling 24 hours a day? No. But she practiced the identity of a woman whose brother was well. She rehearsed it, she occupied it, she lived from it even when fear tried to pull her back. And consciousness responded because consciousness doesn't demand perfection. It responds to your predominant identity. Who are you mostly being? That is what manifests. So practice. Practice the wealthy identity even if you still feel poor sometimes. Practice the loved identity even if you still feel lonely sometimes. Practice the successful identity even if you still feel uncertain sometimes. The old self will protest, it will scream, it will try to reclaim its throne. But if you persist in practicing the new identity, the old must eventually die. This is law. Now I know what you're thinking. Abdullah, I understand these shifts, but when I try to practice them, I fall back into my old identity. The doubt returns. The fear creeps in. This is why I want you to comment the word reset below this video. When you do, you will receive the Manifest Reset Guide. This guide contains 5 resets that return you to the wish fulfilled when you have fallen out of the state, because you will fall out sometimes. But falling out doesn't mean failure. It means you need a reset. Comment reset now. Get the guide. And let me continue with the 4th shift. Shift number 4. Your identity creates evidence, not vice versa. Here is the shift that breaks most people. Your new identity creates the evidence. Evidence does not create your identity. People wait for proof before they change. They say, show me the money in my account, then I'll believe I'm wealthy. Show me the relationship working, then I'll believe I'm loved. Show me the success, then I'll believe I'm capable. But this is backward and it keeps you trapped forever. I'll tell you why I had authority as a teacher. Not because I had credentials, not because I had degrees, but because my consciousness was that of one who knows. People sought me out. Doctors, lawyers, bankers, successful men from all over New York came to my modest room on West 72nd Street. Why? Because they felt the authority in my consciousness. I wasn't trying to be authoritative. I was authoritative. My identity created the evidence of students seeking me, not the other way around. When Neville first came to me, he wanted evidence before he would believe. I told him, "You are in Barbados." He said, "But I'm standing here in New York. I have no money for a ticket. I have no way to get there." I slammed the door in his face because he was asking for evidence before assuming the identity. And this is impossible. Your bank account is not the cause of your wealth consciousness. Your wealth consciousness is the cause of your bank account. The relationship is not the cause of your feeling loved. Your feeling loved is the cause of the relationship. You must become first, then evidence appears, never the other way around. This is why the woman with buildings on 57th Street succeeded. She didn't wait for evidence that she could build wealth. She became wealthy in consciousness. And then the evidence had no choice but to appear because consciousness creates reality always, without exception. So stop waiting for proof. Become the identity now and watch how quickly the world reorganizes itself to match. Shift number 5, you cannot fake identity. Others feel what you are. The 5th shift is subtle but critical. You cannot fake your identity. Others feel what you are, not what you are trying to be. Why did successful men seek me out? Because they could feel my consciousness. They didn't analyze whether I was trying to be wise. They felt the wisdom itself. Consciousness recognizes consciousness. like attracts like at the level of identity. This is why half measures don't work. You cannot be 50% wealthy and 50% poor. You cannot be partially confident and partially insecure. Consciousness occupies one state at a time, and everyone around you feels which state you are occupying. When you are practicing the wealthy identity but keep slipping back into poverty consciousness, people feel the poverty. They feel the doubt beneath your words. They feel the fear beneath your confidence, and they respond to what you are, not what you are saying. This is why Neville had to die to his old self. Not improve it, not mask it, not cover it with positive thinking. Die to it completely. Only then could his new identity radiate purely. Only then could people feel the authority in his consciousness. You cannot fool consciousness. You cannot trick the law. You must actually become. And when you do, when you fully occupy the new identity, everyone feels it. They don't know why. They can't explain it, but they are drawn to you. They trust you. They respond to you because consciousness attracts consciousness. The wealthy consciousness attracts wealth. The loved consciousness attracts love. The successful consciousness attracts success. So stop trying to fake it. Stop performing confidence while feeling fear. Instead, die to the fearful self. Actually become the confident self and watch how differently the world responds. Shift number 6. The death must be complete. No attachment to the old identity. Now we come to the shift that most refuse entirely. The death must be complete. You cannot keep one foot in your old identity just in case. You cannot hedge your bets. You cannot maintain a backup plan that proves you don't truly believe. When I told Neville, "You will have died," I meant it absolutely. Not "you will be improved." Not "you will be better." Dead. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. A man needed to sell a piece of land. It had been a financial burden for years. He wrote to a real estate agent. The agent's reply was crushing. "Sales are at a standstill. The market is terrible. You'll be waiting until after the first of the year at least." Now, most people would accept this. They would say, well, the agent knows the market. I guess I'll wait. But this man had learned the law. He didn't accept the evidence as final. Instead, he revised it. In his imagination, he rewrote the agent's letter. He made it say, "I'm eager to take your listing." Then he created a scene. Standing in the real estate office, shaking the agent's hand, hearing the words, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." He rehearsed this scene until it felt more real than the agent's negative letter. And here is the critical part. He released attachment to his old identity. The old identity that said, "I'm stuck with this burden. The market is bad. I have no power." That identity had to die completely. He couldn't practice the new identity while secretly clinging to the old one. 3 days later, the agent called. He had a deposit at the exact price specified. The man went to the office, signed the papers, extended his hand. "Thank you, sir," the agent replied. "It was a pleasure doing business with you." Word for word, exactly as imagined, 5 days total, from impossible sale to sold, but only because he released attachment to the old identity completely. He didn't keep a backup plan. He didn't hedge his bet. He died to the victim identity and was reborn as the creator. This is what is required. Shift number 7. Wealth is who you are, not what you do. The final shift brings everything together. Wealth is not something you do. It is who you are. Most people focus on techniques. What should I visualize? How long should I persist? What scene should I imagine? But techniques are useless without identity transformation. You can visualize perfectly and manifest nothing if you are visualizing from a poor identity. You can affirm abundance all day while being poverty consciousness. The doing doesn't matter if the being is wrong. This is what I taught Neville that changed everything. I didn't give him better techniques. I gave him a new identity. I taught him to become the man who already had what he desired. Not to act like that man, not to pretend to be that man, to actually be that man in consciousness. When you are wealthy, you don't chase money. Money flows to you naturally because wealth is your identity. When you are loved, you don't chase relationships. Love flows to you naturally because it matches your consciousness. When you are successful, you don't chase opportunities. Opportunities seek you. Because success is who you are. The woman who owns buildings on 57th Street didn't chase every deal. She became wealthy in consciousness, and wealth pursued her. The woman whose brother was healed didn't beg for healing. She became the woman whose brother was well, and wellness appeared. The man who sold his land didn't force the market to change. He became the man whose land was sold, and the sale materialized. This is law. Be the identity first. Everything else follows. Always. Practical application. Now you understand the 7 shifts, but understanding is not enough. You must practice. So let me give you the method. First, identify your current identity, not what you want, but what you are right now in consciousness. Are you being poor, unloved, stuck, powerless? Be honest. Your current reality is perfect evidence of your current identity. If you don't like your reality, you don't like your identity. Second, define the new identity clearly. Not, I want to be wealthy, but I am the person who owns buildings on 57th Street. Not, I want my brother healed, but I am the woman whose brother is perfectly well. Not, I want the land sold, but I am the man whose land sold for profit. Be specific. Third, practice being this identity daily. I taught Neville what I call living in the end. This doesn't mean visualizing the end. It means being the person for whom the end is already accomplished. How would that person think? How would that person feel? How would that person move through their day? Practice this. Every morning when you wake, ask, who am I today? Answer with your new identity, not your old one. Every night before sleep, rehearse being this person. Feel what they feel, think what they think, experience what they experience. Fourth, and this is critical, when your old identity tries to return, reset. Don't fight it. Don't judge yourself. Simply reset. Return to the new identity. This is why the 5 resets in the Manifest Reset Guide are so powerful. They give you specific methods to return to the wish fulfilled when doubt appears, when fear creeps in, when evidence contradicts your new identity. You reset again and again until the new identity becomes natural, until it becomes who you are without effort. And fifth, release attachment to how it happens. Your job is to be the identity. The universe's job is to reorganize reality around that identity. Don't micromanage the bridge of incidents. Don't demand it happen your way. Be the identity. Let God, consciousness, handle the details. The woman with millions didn't know how she would build wealth. She just became wealthy in consciousness. The woman whose brother healed didn't know how he would recover. She just became the woman whose brother was well. The man who sold his land didn't know how the market would change. He just became the man whose land was sold. They practiced the identity. They released attachment to the method, and consciousness created the path. This is your work now. Practice the identity. Reset when you fall out. Trust the law. And speaking of resetting, if you haven't already, comment reset below this video. Get the Manifest Reset Guide because I promise you, you will need these resets. The old identity doesn't die quietly. It fights, it screams, it tries to reclaim its throne. But with the 5 resets, you can return to your new identity instantly whenever doubt appears, whenever fear creeps in, whenever the 3D reality tries to convince you nothing has changed. Reset and return to who you are. Comment reset now, and let me give you the final teaching. These 7 shifts are everything I taught Neville privately. They transformed him from a broke dancer with nothing into a master teacher who changed thousands of lives. But understand this, these shifts require courage because they require death. The death of who you have been, the death of your familiar self, the death of the identity you have worn for years, even if that identity was painful. Most people prefer familiar pain to unfamiliar freedom. They cling to their poverty because at least they know how to be poor. They cling to their loneliness because at least they know how to be alone. They cling to their limitations because at least they know how to be limited. But you, if you have listened this far, you are different. You are willing to die. You are willing to release the old self and become someone new. And I tell you now, this is the path. Not technique perfection, not visualizing harder, not feeling it real with more intensity, but identity transformation. Complete, absolute, total. Become the person who already has what you desire. Not tomorrow, not when evidence appears. Now, today, this moment. Be that person in consciousness and watch how rapidly your world transforms. The wealth will come, the healing will manifest, the success will appear. Not because you earned it, not because you deserved it, but because you became the identity that naturally attracts it. This is law. This is what I taught Neville, and this is what I teach you now. Die to who you were. Be born as who you are becoming, and live from that new identity without wavering. Do this, and nothing can stop you because consciousness is the only reality, and you are consciousness itself. But there is something else I taught Neville about wealth, something even more specific than these 7 shifts, a precise method for transforming poverty consciousness into wealth consciousness, a technique I use myself to attract students from across New York City. A secret that, when Neville discovered it, changed his entire relationship with money. Most people will never know this teaching because it requires you to understand something about wealth that contradicts everything society teaches. The video appearing on your screen right now reveals this wealth secret, the exact identity shift that creates financial abundance. How I went from nothing to having doctors and lawyers seek my counsel. How that woman went from not one penny to buildings on 57th Street. The specific consciousness of wealth that attracts money effortlessly. Watch it immediately. Your financial transformation is waiting. These truths either disturb you enough to die or comfort you enough to stay asleep. Choose the death. And remember, consciousness is the only reality, and you are that consciousness. Subscribe to Stories and Quotes Be.